What's up, people? Old McWaller out here. It's been a long time. It's been a little while anyway. You can see what's going on in the garden. Everything is growing wonderfully. But that's not why I'm here. I wanted to talk to you guys about something. Let me show you guys this. If you guys recall, I think it was a couple weeks ago, I told you guys I was excited. I bought a lemon and a lime plant. If you can see this, this is my lime plant, totally dead. If you can't see it, it's because it's just all the leaves are gone. Okay. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk to you guys today is because I wanted to explain to you guys about what could have been the problem with this and what I think the actual issue is. When dealing with container gardening, one of the number one problems that you're going to run into is either you're not watering enough, because when something is in a container, the moisture drains out. Plus, it's getting heat from all around, especially in the summertime, and that can dry out your containers very quickly, right? So lack of water is a issue. The other issue that you can run into is you don't properly fertilize, right? And we'll talk about that another time. But this one, what's my issue here is the other one, that other problem that people can run into, and it's very, very common, is that there's not sufficient drainage. When there's not sufficient drainage, what can happen is your plants will actually, the roots will actually rot. Now, I put sufficient drainage holes at the bottom, and I put this bark here as a mulch cover, and my soil is very moist, so I know that it was underwatered. Now, the issue though is the potting soil that I use in here is not a good draining potting soil. Okay. Now, I was gone for a week, about 4 days. And some of you guys know, if you've heard me say, I'm getting my master's degree, and this was probably the hardest semester I've ever had. And this past week I've had papers on top of papers due, and I haven't touched this garden hardly at all, right? So I'm out here today. I got to get some stuff done to clean it up. And just a quick side note, beginners, how much you can grow is not dependent on how big a space you have. It's contingent upon how much time you have to take care of it. All right. So write that down. It's not about how much space you have. It's how much time you have to dedicate. Okay. So because I didn't have any time to dedicate, and we didn't get any rain, or we didn't get anything like that, a lot of my stuff was dying from lack of water. But then I noticed the soil was already wet, so that tells me that this got choked out, and the roots got too moist. So what I want to talk to you guys today about sufficient drainage. Okay. So when you are getting pots, sometimes they come with holes, right? So here's an example of a flower pot that you can purchase, right? Now, many times you guys, if it doesn't come with holes, a lot of times what people would do is they will take a drill and drill some holes in. And what you guys normally do, see a lot of people do this, is use the biggest standard drill bit that's in there. This drill bit is not big enough for drainage. Now, if you use something like this, you literally will have to do a Swiss cheese type of drilling to provide ample drainage in your containers, right? This is from a nursery, right? A flower was in it. As you can see, this is not even the size of the holes that the professional pots use, right? Now, at the minimum, when you use a flower pot like this, at the minimum, what you want to use is a 1/2 inch drill bit. Hopefully you can see that. Half. That is the size of these holes here. This is a 1/2, right? And you can see how many holes they put in here, in this little thing here, with that size drill bit. So if you use something smaller, you would have to drill all kinds of holes in here, right? So you want to make sure you use the correct size drill bit, and that's just for something small. Now when you're talking about for something bigger, like this size, I would recommend at least 3/4 of an inch drill bit that you want to put in there. And if you're going with something like this, these totes, you want to go with something like a 7/8, or you can get away with a 3/4. It just depends. Okay. Now, one of the other things I want to tips that I want to tell you guys, and I'll show you here. A lot of times when we're doing our drilling holes, we're always putting holes in the bottom, which is great. But one of the things that you want to do, especially if you're putting it on something like this, or even if you're doing it on the cement, when you're drilling your holes, you want to check the bottom of your container and see what kind of pattern is at the bottom of it. Notice there are these, what is that? 9, right? 9 big blocks here. These are raised up, even with this border here. So when you sat this on, say this was cement that I was going to sit this on, flat to the ground is going to be these 9 things and this border. What people do is drill holes in here. That's not what you want to do. What you will want to do is drill holes in those creases, because the crease is not going to be sitting directly flush to the ground, and that will allow drainage. Even with this sitting directly on the ground, that'll allow the drainage to go through. So I will put holes in the spaces that's not on the flattest piece. Now, there are times when it's totally flat, and so you can't really do something like that. For example, my bucket here is totally flat, basically. So you would just make sure you have good enough holes. Now, one of the other things that I recommend, for especially when it's larger, so for containers like this size or for totes, in addition to doing your holes at the bottom, what you want to do is put a hole in the corners here. I hope you guys can see me. So right, not on the side and not on the bottom, but right where the corner meets the bottom. Let's see if I can do it here. You put it on the corner like that. What that does is it allows that if I sit this directly on the ground, there's still going to be a peak of that hole that'll allow for drainage. Okay, so for in larger containers, I would also, not in addition to a hole in the bottom, I'm going to be putting holes on the corners at the bottom to sufficiently allow for drainage. Okay, another thing you can do, whether you put it in the corner or at the bottom, what you can do is, before you put soil in, you can lay down a drainage layer. What you would do in something like that is you could put a whole bunch of little rocks down at the bottom. You can put balled up plastic things down at the bottom. Anything that will produce, a little layer in between your soil and the bottom of this, which will allow when you water, when the water hits the rocks won't cover up your holes like soil will, and it will allow the stuff to drain. So especially when you're dealing with a large container like this, you would put a layer down at the bottom of rock and then fill it up to the top. If you're dealing with something like a tote, what I would recommend if you did the rocks was you would put a layer of rocks down, but because of the size of this thing and the volume of soil that goes into here, what I would do is I would put a layer of weed cloth over top of those rocks, right? And that will prevent the rest of the soil from packing in the rock so much that it actually covers up your holes still, right? So, and something like that, I would recommend like that. Something like this, you wouldn't have to go, if you put the rock layer in something like this, you wouldn't have to do that as well. Another thing you can do, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out because I actually did purchase another lime tree. And I'm going to, even though my lemon tree, let me show y'all the lemon. Even though my lemon over there is looking okay, I'm going to repot it because I actually potted the lemon and the lime the exact same way in the exact same soil. And so I want to make sure that later on in the season that I don't run into issues with this lemon plant, because we've been actually fairly dry. We haven't had any rain and it's been very, very hot. And so it's surviving over there. But if we happen to have, one of those weeks where it's just raining, as a matter of fact, this week coming is supposed to rain a few times heavy this week. I want to make sure that this thing over there doesn't get root rot as well. So I'm going to repot it, and using the method that I'm talking about, I'm about to explain to you guys now, which is basically I'm going to take this pot, I'm going to empty everything out, and I'm going to fill this pot with, I'm going to fill the pot up about 3/4 of the way with the potting soil. The remaining, I'm going to put in perlite. Then I'm going to take it and mix that perlite and this potting soil back up. And what that is going to do is add extra drainage. If you guys saw my video that I did with the filling of the raised beds, I told you guys the 3 things that can be used for drainage. And each one of those 3 things will work. You can do perlite, you can do vermiculite, or you can do sand. Sand will do the same exact thing. If you want to go 3/4 of the way and then pour all-purpose coarse sand in here, right, just so you have your measurements, then you pour it back out, mix it all together so that it blends really well, then plant your plant in it. Those products are going to add the extra drainage that I need. And I'm only going to do that because I already know the holes in here are big enough, and because I'm growing a actual tree, this is a lime tree, I don't want to take up any of the bottom with rocks. I want it to have the full amount of volume to grow its roots. So that's why I'm going that route for this method. If I was planting something in here, I would think about and I had that issue, I would think about either probably doing the rocks or I would probably do a rock layer at the bottom if that was the issue with this. So, so that's about it. I'm gonna get these all planted out again, but I just wanted to give you guys those few tips. Okay. So 1, you want to make sure that when you're drilling holes that you put the minimum 1/2-inch holes at the bottom of flat plants. And for flower, that will be for flower pots about this size, a little bit bigger than this. You want to make sure you have ample 1/2-inch holes for drainage. When you're dealing with something large like this or this size, you want to go with at least a 3/4 inch to put holes in the bottom of something like this. When you're going with larger, like this here or this, you want to put the 7/8 1-inch holes. Don't worry, your soil and stuff will not fall out of that. And you want to put a good amount. So for example, in this, I'm gonna put 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And that'll be 5. I might put 9 or 10 holes in the bottom of this, because this is a whole lot of volume. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm not going to put a rock layer in this. So I want to make sure I have a whole lot of holes in this. Same with here. You don't want to put it on these. You want to go in between. So if I did this, I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 holes. Plus I would do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on. So I put about 12 holes in this thing. 6 of those being in the corners, right, on along the side. 6 of them being on the bottom, and that will give ample drainage. So and then also making sure that you have a good draining potting soil. If you don't have a good draining potting soil, then what you want to do is fill your container up to 3/4. Then you want to add another quarter of either vermiculite, sand, or perlite. For potting plants, I recommend perlite, not vermiculite. If we were talking about in our garden beds, I would probably recommend vermiculite or perlite. For something like this, I would definitely recommend something as large as this. I would recommend perlite because it's a little bit bigger than the sand is. Plus, sand actually adds weight. Sand is very heavy, so to make these things real heavy, if you put in a quarter of sand in these things, and if it's time to, you need to move it somewhere or something like that, that sand is going to make these really heavy. Now, when you're talking about something small, a potted plant like this, or if you're going to do a pot like this or something like that, then sand will be just fine, because this thing ain't but so big anyway, right? So that's not a problem. So, okay, guys, that's all I wanted to talk to you guys about in this episode. I'm preparing these because I am today going to be planting some potatoes. So I'm going to be recording that video soon. All right. Thanks a lot. So, before I end this video, I just want to show you guys what I was talking about. So this stuff here is the potting soil that I was using. This was the potting soil I use. Is the cheapest potting soil. Does not have ample drainage. It is very good with retaining moisture, which is good. But like I said, it can possibly, depending on the vegetable or the plant that you're growing, it could choke out your roots. So all I did was add coarse perlite. Okay, so my stuff comes in 4 cubic feet. I was able to get this at a local nursery for about $25 for this big bag. There is a brand, I think it's Vigoro or something like that, you can buy in any big box store. It'll come in 2 cubic feet of perlite, and it's like $16 or something like that. But if you have a nursery and you can get a big bag like this, or if you can't, like I said, you can find it at the big box store, and it's normally $16 for 2 cubic feet. All I did was, I told you I'm about to do my potato video. I took this container here and I poured out the entire bag in here. It came out to right about this level here. Now, when I fill my buckets up, I leave at least inch or 2 gap from the top. So it was almost there. So all I did was I poured perlite into the top where I wanted it to be. So I poured it up so that the perlite covered up maybe that much, right? So it left me that gap that I wanted. Then I poured all of it into my barrel, my wheelbarrow here, and then I mixed it up. And that's what it looks like. It's that now I turn this cheap stuff into a premium potting mix because it now has the perlite and that added drainage. So it already had good moisture retention. All it needed was drainage. So that's what I did. I gave it the drainage. So this is a good to go. Now what I do, because I'm using this for my potatoes, I'm going to put in what I need for the potatoes, and there's going to be some left over. And so I keep the bag, and what I'm going to do is just put it back into the bag and save for later. So when I open my bags, when I get these bags, I always try to open them clean across the top so that I can put the stuff back. You know, some people are cutting the bags open any old kind of way. That's okay if you're not going to be, if you're just putting it in a raised bed or something like that. But because I know I'm going to reuse this, I cut it open so that I can put the remainder back in the bag, and you know, I can use it later. All right, guys, that's it. Peace.